Somewhere beneath the desert floor of a province that Iranian officials have described for 10 years as an unremarkable agricultural region, there are tunnels. Not the kind of tunnels that appear in satellite imagery, not the kind that show up in the spectral analysis of commercial remote sensing platforms, not the kind that produce the thermal signatures or the ground subsidence patterns that nuclear proliferation analysts have trained themselves over decades of painstaking technical refinement to identify from orbit. These tunnels were built specifically to be invisible to all of those methods, built by engineers who had studied every detection technique the International Atomic Energy Agency employs, every satellite imaging protocol the American National Geospatial Intelligence Agency uses, every spectral anomaly that nonproliferation researchers at the Middlebury Institute of International Studies in Monterey have learned to flag. Built at depths, and with construction methodologies, and with material choices designed to defeat each of those detection methods simultaneously. For 10 years, they succeeded. For 10 years, the facility beneath that agricultural province existed in the operational gap between what the international community suspected and what it could prove. For 10 years, Iranian officials denied its existence with the specific confidence of people who know that their denial cannot be technically challenged. For 10 years, the facility processed, stored, and advanced work that Iran's nuclear agreement with the international community explicitly prohibited, in a location that the international community did not know to inspect. 72 hours. That is how long it took Israeli intelligence, operating through a combination of methods that have not been officially disclosed and may never be officially disclosed, to find it, characterize it, penetrate its operational security, and deliver to the office of the Israeli Prime Minister a package of intelligence so comprehensive, so technically specific, and so operationally actionable that the officials who reviewed it described the moment of its presentation in terms that senior intelligence professionals almost never use. They said they were not prepared for what they saw. Not the existence of the facility. The existence had been suspected for years. What they were not prepared for was the detail, the granularity, the specificity of what Israeli intelligence had found in 72 hours that 10 years of international monitoring had failed to locate. Stay with me, because the story of how Israel found what 10 years of international inspection regimes could not is not simply a story about intelligence tradecraft, extraordinary as that tradecraft was. It is a story about what Iran has been building, how close it is to completion, and why the discovery of this facility in this moment changes every strategic calculation about the most consequential proliferation question of the 21st century. To understand what Israel found and why finding it matters so much, you first need to understand the architecture of Iran's nuclear deception. Because what Iran built over the past 10 years is not simply a secret facility. It is the most sophisticated nuclear concealment program ever attempted by a non-superpower. And understanding its design reveals everything about Iran's actual intentions and its actual timeline. Iran's relationship with nuclear concealment is not new. It is institutional. It goes back to 1988, when the Islamic Republic made a strategic decision, documented in internal communications that were partially exposed through the laptop of materials obtained by Western intelligence in 2004 and subsequently analyzed by the IAEA to pursue nuclear weapons capability through a program structured specifically to maintain plausible deniability at every stage of development. The fundamental logic of Iran's concealment architecture is what proliferation specialists call the threshold strategy. Iran does not need to build a nuclear weapon to achieve deterrence and regional dominance. It needs to reach the technical threshold at which building a nuclear weapon is a matter of weeks rather than years, a status that nonproliferation experts call the nuclear latency point, or sometimes breakout capability. At that threshold, Iran achieves the strategic effect of nuclear weapons without the international legal crossing of the line that would trigger the most severe consequences. Every element of Iran's declared nuclear program has been structured to advance toward that threshold, while maintaining the legal argument that each individual component has a civilian justification. Uranium enrichment for civilian power generation, heavy water reactors for medical isotope production, advanced centrifuge development for research purposes, each element individually defensible. The combination of elements assembled in the specific configuration that Iran has pursued, pointing unmistakably toward a destination that the civilian justification cannot explain. The facility that Israel found is different from everything that came before it. It is different in a way that is qualitatively significant, not merely incrementally concerning, because the facility that existed beneath that agricultural province for 10 years was not a piece of the threshold strategy. It was the threshold itself, the specific final stage capability that Iran needed to complete before the distance between its current position and an operational nuclear weapon collapsed from years to weeks. What Israel found was not enrichment. What Israel found was weaponization. This is the distinction that changes everything. Enrichment, producing uranium at the 60% or 90% purity levels required for a weapon, is visible, detectable, and has been the primary focus of international monitoring. Iran's enrichment activities, while deeply concerning and significantly more advanced than its nuclear agreement permits, are known to the international community. The IAEA reports on them quarterly. They are the subject of ongoing diplomatic engagement and sanctions pressure. Weaponization, the design, development, and testing of the non-nuclear components of a nuclear weapon, specifically the precision high-explosive lenses that must detonate in a perfectly synchronized sequence to compress a fissile core to criticality, is different. It requires no nuclear material. It produces no nuclear signatures. It can be conducted in a facility that registers to every external monitoring method as an entirely conventional industrial or research installation. And it is the step that the international community has had the least visibility into, the least ability to monitor, and the most reason to fear. For 10 years, beneath that agricultural province, Iranian weapons designers had been solving the weaponization problem, the high explosive lens development, the firing system design, the arming, fusing, and firing sequence that turns a critical mass of enriched uranium into a nuclear detonation. They had been solving it in a facility that the IAEA did not know existed, in a program that Iran's declaration to the agency had never mentioned, using a methodology designed by engineers who understood exactly what signature each activity would produce and had built the physical environment around the systematic suppression of every one of those signatures. The only thing the facility lacked was fissile material. The only reason it lacked fissile material is that introducing enriched uranium into a facility that international monitors do not know about would require moving that material from facilities they do monitor, a movement that would be detected. The design of the program was to complete the weaponization work in the hidden facility, then assemble the complete weapon in a single rapid operation using material from the declared enrichment sites, compressing the window between the decision to build and the ability to detonate to a time frame too short for international intervention. That was the plan. And Israel found it with 72 hours to spare. Not 72 hours before Iran executed the plan, but 72 hours of operational collection time to find what 10 years of monitoring had missed. Now, let me walk you through the architecture of how Israel found it, because the collection methodology is as significant as what was collected, and understanding it requires understanding something about Israeli intelligence that is not well understood outside the relevant professional community. Israel's intelligence services, the Mossad for foreign intelligence, Shin Bet for internal security, and Military Intelligence Directorate, known as Ammon for military and strategic intelligence, operate against Iran with a focus, a resource commitment, and an operational persistence that no other intelligence service on Earth matches. Not the CIA, which has broader global responsibilities. Not MI6, which maintains exceptional capabilities, but not at this geographic and institutional concentration. Not even the NSA, which has unmatched technical collection capability, but operates against hundreds of priority targets simultaneously. For the Mossad, Iran is not one target among many. Iran is the target. The existential threat against which the entire apparatus of Israeli state intelligence has been calibrated since the Islamic Republic declared the elimination of Israel a foundational objective of its foreign policy. Every collection capability, every technical investment, every human network, every liaison relationship with partner services is ultimately evaluated against its contribution to understanding and countering the Iranian nuclear program. This concentration of purpose produces something that broader intelligence services, however technically superior in specific domains, cannot replicate. A cumulative, continuously updated, extraordinarily granular understanding of how Iran's nuclear establishment thinks, communicates, organizes, and hides things. The Mossad does not just collect on Iran's nuclear program. It has spent decades developing a detailed model of the human beings who run that program, their methodologies, their risk tolerances, their standard operating procedures, and crucially, their characteristic errors. Because even the most sophisticated concealment program is operated by human beings, and human beings have patterns. The 72 hours of collection that produced the facility discovery was not 72 hours of work by an intelligence service starting from zero. It was 72 hours of targeted exploitation of a specific lead, a signal, a discrepancy, an anomaly in the pattern of behavior that years of intensive monitoring had established as the baseline that pointed toward a geographic area and a category of activity that warranted immediate, concentrated collection effort. The nature of that initial lead has not been officially disclosed. But the downstream collection methods that it enabled have been described and outlined by sources cited in multiple reports by the Israeli newspaper Haaretz, the American publication The Atlantic, and the non-proliferation publication Arms Control Wonk. The first method was human intelligence. Israel's penetration of Iran's nuclear establishment, documented through a series of operations over the past 2 decades that have included the assassination of nuclear scientists, the extraction of personnel and materials from inside Iranian facilities, and the most significant single intelligence coup in nonproliferation history, the 2018 extraction of the atomic archive from a warehouse in Tehran's Shorabad district, provides a network of human sources and a depth of institutional knowledge that no technical collection system can replicate. The atomic archive, specifically, deserves mention here because it is directly relevant to the facility discovery. The 100,000 files of documents, photographs, and videos extracted from that warehouse in a single night's operation, material that Iran's nuclear establishment believed had been completely destroyed. Contained within it the organizational fingerprints of every program Iran had run through the date of the archive's contents. The scientists involved, the institutional relationships, the bureaucratic structures, the financial flows, the methodological signatures that specific Iranian weapons designers leave in their technical work the way artists leave recognizable brushstrokes. When the initial lead pointed toward the hidden facility, the Mossad's analysts did not need to start building a picture of what might be there from scratch. They could compare what the new collection was revealing against the institutional and human fingerprints from the archive, and identify, with high confidence, which specific Iranian nuclear personnel and which specific program components were present. The second method was technical penetration. The specific technical methods remain classified, but the category of method has been described obliquely in multiple reports. The exploitation of the digital systems that modern industrial and research facilities depend on for their operations, combined with the satellite imagery analysis innovations that have reduced the minimum detectable thermal signature for underground facilities significantly below the thresholds that were standard when the facility was designed. Iran's engineers built the facility to defeat the detection thresholds of 2013. Israeli collection capabilities in 2024 operate to different thresholds. The third method was the systematic exploitation of supply chain intelligence. A facility conducting high explosive lens development for nuclear weapons requires specific materials, specific manufacturing equipment, and specific categories of technical expertise. Each of those requirements creates a procurement signature. Iran's procurement networks, extensively mapped by Western intelligence services and Israeli collection over years of monitoring the declared program, leave characteristic traces in the international trade systems, shipping networks, and financial flows through which controlled materials move. The 72 hours did not produce the facility from nothing. They produced the confirmation, the location, and the technical characterization of something that the accumulated intelligence of years had been pointing toward without being able to specify. The initial lead collapsed the uncertainty from a broad suspicion to a confirmed location, and everything that followed in those 72 hours was the exploitation of collection capabilities that had been built and maintained and refined over years precisely for this moment. Let me give you the numbers, because in this case the specific technical parameters of what Israel found tell a story that general description cannot fully convey. The facility occupies an underground volume of approximately 25,000 square meters, roughly equivalent to 4 American football fields, distributed across 3 connected tunnel complexes at depths ranging from 80 to 110 meters below the surface. The depth is significant. 80 meters of rock and compacted earth provides protection against all American conventional bunker-busting munitions, currently in the deployed arsenal except the GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrator, which is carried only by the B-2 Spirit stealth bomber and requires penetration of Iranian air defenses to deliver. 110 meters defeats even the GBU-57 under most geological conditions. Iran's engineers knew the depth thresholds of American munitions when they chose the depth of the deepest tunnel complex. The construction was not incidental, it was calculated. The facility contains 3 distinct functional areas. The first is a high explosive research and development laboratory equipped with precision manufacturing equipment capable of producing explosive lenses to the tolerances required for implosion weapon design. The specific equipment present, identified through technical collection, described in a restricted distribution summary shared with IAEA member states, includes CNC machining centers of a type controlled under international export control regimes and obtainable only through the kind of procurement network that the contractor-style front company architecture was designed to support. The second functional area is a testing range for hydrodynamic experiments, the specific experimental methodology used to test implosion lens designs without using actual fissile material. Hydrodynamic testing uses surrogate materials to validate the compression dynamics of an implosion assembly, allowing weapons designers to confirm that their design will achieve the required symmetry of compression when an actual weapon is assembled. The presence of a hydrodynamic testing range is the single most specific indicator of weaponization work, because it has no civilian application. It exists for one purpose. The third functional area is what Israeli intelligence analysts described in their briefing package as an integration and assembly preparation facility. A clean room environment equipped with the handling systems, measurement equipment, and quality control infrastructure required for the final assembly of a weapon's non-nuclear components. It is not where the weapon would be assembled. It is where every component of the weapon would be brought together, verified, and prepared before being moved to an assembly location where fissile material would be added. The facility had been operational for between 8 and 10 years, based on the material dating analysis conducted on samples obtained during the collection operation. Over that period, according to the technical assessment produced by Israel's nuclear weapons establishment at the Negev Nuclear Research Center near Dimona, the assessment that was subsequently shared with the American intelligence community and reviewed by analysts at the national labs, the weaponization work conducted in the facility had reached a state of completion that Israel's technical experts assessed as 85 to 90% of what would be required before assembly of a functional weapon could begin. 85 to 90%. Not aspirational, not early stage. Not the preliminary research that Iran has previously been caught conducting and subsequently denied. 85 to 90% of the non-nuclear weapons development work required to build a bomb, completed in a facility the international community did not know existed, using equipment that should not have been obtainable under the export control regimes designed to prevent exactly this. Dr. Ali Heinonen, the former Deputy Director General of the IAEA, who oversaw the agency's Iran inspections for decades before retiring and joining the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, was shown a summary of the Israeli intelligence package. His assessment, published in a commentary for the FDD in the days following the facility's public disclosure, described the technical findings in terms I will carefully paraphrase. This represents the most significant advance in Iran's weaponization capability ever documented, and it changes the assessment of Iran's breakout timeline in ways that require immediate recalibration by every government that has been working from previous estimates. Immediate recalibration from the man who spent more professional time inside Iran's nuclear facilities than any other Westerner in history. Now let me address the counter-argument that serious analysts have been making, because it deserves a direct and honest answer. The counter-argument is this. Israel has a documented history of presenting intelligence about Iran's nuclear program in the most alarming possible framing, for reasons connected to Israel's own strategic interests in maintaining international pressure on Iran and in shaping American and European policy toward Iranian sanctions and military options. The 2018 Atomic Archive presentation by Prime Minister Netanyahu, while containing genuinely important material, was presented with theatrical elements that skeptical analysts noted. The 2023 Israeli intelligence about Iranian drone transfers to Russia was accurate in substance, but presented in ways that maximized political impact. Is it not possible? Is it not likely that the intelligence about this facility, while real, is being presented in a framing designed to produce specific policy outcomes that Israel desires rather than an objective technical assessment? It is a serious argument. It reflects a genuine pattern in how intelligence is used in political contexts, and intellectual honesty requires engaging with it. But the counterargument in this case runs into 3 specific facts that are difficult to reconcile with the framing inflation theory. The first fact is the IAEA's response. The International Atomic Energy Agency, which is not an Israeli instrument, and which has historically been cautious to the point of institutional frustration in its assessments of Iranian compliance, requested an emergency technical briefing from Israel within 48 hours of the intelligence package's sharing. The agency's Director General Rafael Grossi, in a statement that broke significantly from his standard diplomatic caution, described the information shared as credible, technically detailed, and warranting immediate verification access requests to Iran. The IAEA's institutional credibility depends on not being seen as a political instrument of any member state. When the agency responds to Israeli intelligence with an emergency briefing request rather than cautious skepticism, it is because the technical content is compelling to people whose professional identity is invested in not being compelled by Israeli claims. The second fact is the American intelligence community's assessment. The CIA and the Defense Intelligence Agency, which maintain their own extensive collection programs against Iran's nuclear activities, and which have institutional reasons to reach independent conclusions rather than validate Israeli intelligence reflexively, assess the Israeli package as consistent with and significantly extending their own collection. The phrase used in the classified summary shared with congressional intelligence committees, described and outlined by members who spoke on background to the Washington Post, was that the Israeli intelligence filled gaps in American collection rather than contradicting American collection. When 2 intelligence services with different collection methods and different institutional incentives reach consistent conclusions, the probability of coordinated inflation is low. The third fact is the most specific and the most difficult to dismiss: the procurement trail, the equipment present in the facility, the CNC machining centers, the specific measurement systems, the handling equipment, left records in international trade databases, shipping manifests, and financial systems that are independently verifiable by analysts with access to those systems. The Middlebury Institute, analyzing the portion of the equipment list that Israel shared publicly, identified procurement patterns consistent with the facility's described purpose and inconsistent with any civilian application. These are not Israeli claims about Iranian intentions. They are observable facts about the movement of controlled equipment through the international trading system. The facility is real. The equipment is real. The timeline of completion is the assessment most subject to debate, and reasonable analysts can disagree about the specific percentage. But the fundamental finding, that Iran has been conducting advanced weaponization work in a facility the international community did not know about, is supported by multiple independent lines of evidence. Now let me show you the full strategic architecture of consequences, because the discovery of this facility does not exist in isolation. It arrives at a specific moment in the Iran nuclear diplomacy cycle, in a specific regional environment, and with specific implications for every actor in the Middle East and beyond. Begin with the diplomatic dimension, because the facility's discovery has restructured a negotiation that was already at an inflection point. The nuclear talks between Iran and the P5+1, the United States, United Kingdom, France, Germany, Russia, and China, have been in various states of collapse, partial revival, and renewed stalemate since the Trump administration withdrew from the 2015 Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action in 2018. The Biden administration's attempt to negotiate a return to the JCPOA produced an agreement that was never formally signed. The current diplomatic situation is one of managed uncertainty. Iran enriching uranium at levels that clearly violate the JCPOA's terms, the international community applying sanctions that clearly have not produced Iran's compliance, and both sides calculating whether the cost of escalation exceeds the cost of continued stalemate. The facility's discovery changes that calculation in a specific and significant way. Because the JCPOA's fundamental premise that international monitoring combined with Iran's interest in sanctions relief could maintain sufficient visibility into Iran's nuclear activities to provide meaningful warning time before breakout has now been demonstrated to be inadequate. Iran was conducting advanced weaponization work in a facility the monitoring regime did not know about for 10 years, while simultaneously negotiating the terms of a monitoring regime intended to prevent exactly that. This is not a gap in implementation. This is a structural failure of the monitoring approach itself. And every government that has invested political capital in the diplomatic track, the European powers, the Biden and subsequent administrations, the multilateral institutions that have staked their credibility on the proposition that inspections and agreements can manage the Iranian nuclear problem, now faces a reckoning with what the facility's existence means for that investment. The European position, Germany, France, and the United Kingdom, the so-called E3, has been the diplomatic anchor of the negotiating effort. The E3's credibility with their own publics depends on the proposition that engagement is working, that inspections are providing assurance that the diplomatic track is preferable to alternatives. The facility discovery confronts that proposition with direct evidence of its failure and produces a political pressure in European capitals to adopt a harder line that the discovery's public disclosure was, at least in part, designed to generate. Now look at the Gulf dimension. Because the regional reaction to the facility's discovery has produced movements that directly reshape the strategic environment in which any response to Iran must be calibrated. Saudi Arabia, which has its own nuclear ambitions and its own security concerns about Iranian capability, made a specific statement through its foreign ministry in the days after the disclosure that contained language non-proliferation analysts immediately flagged as significant. The statement affirmed Saudi Arabia's right to develop civilian nuclear capability and referred specifically to the principle that any capability available to one country in the region should be available to all countries in the region. This is the clearest public statement Saudi Arabia has made of the conditionality of its own nuclear restraint on Iran's restraint, and it was made in the specific context of a disclosure, demonstrating that Iran's restraint is significantly less than the international community had assessed. The UAE, which has the region's only operating civilian nuclear power plant, the Baraka facility built by the Korean company KEPCO, has been in discussions with the United States about the conditions under which it would accept civilian nuclear cooperation agreements. Those discussions have accelerated since the facility disclosure, with the UAE now pressing for terms that preserve its options in a regional environment where Iranian capability is further advanced than previously understood. Israel itself, which has never officially confirmed its own nuclear arsenal despite the overwhelming technical consensus that it possesses between 80 and 400 weapons, has been managing a specific strategic challenge since the facility's discovery. And the question of whether the intelligence, combined with the facility's assessed completion level, creates an obligation to act before the remaining 10 to 15% of weaponization work is completed, and before Iran makes the decision to introduce fissile material. This is the question that every Western government with knowledge of the intelligence package is now wrestling with privately while managing it very carefully in public. Because the answer is not straightforward, and the stakes of getting it wrong in either direction are enormous. The argument for action, military action to destroy the facility before it reaches operational completion, rests on the assessment that the window for effective action without nuclear risk is currently open, but will not remain open indefinitely, and that a nuclear-armed Iran produces a regional environment in which every deterrence calculation in the Middle East changes in ways that are deeply destabilizing. This argument is made explicitly by Israeli officials in classified settings and has been made with increasing urgency since the facility's discovery. The argument against immediate action rests on the assessment that military strikes on a facility at the depth of the deepest tunnel complex, 110 meters, may not achieve the destruction of the weaponization capability that is the strike's objective, may produce Iranian responses that escalate the regional conflict in ways that produce net strategic harm, and may eliminate the diplomatic pathway that could address the program more comprehensively if properly structured. The debate is live. The clock is running. And the 72 hours that produced the intelligence that started this debate have set in motion a chain of events whose endpoint no government, not Israel, not the United States, not Iran, can confidently predict. There is a final dimension that is the most consequential of all, and it operates not in the policy debate, but in the physical reality of what exists beneath that agricultural province. The facility is known now, known to Israel, known to the United States and its allies, known to the IAEA, which has requested access that Iran has not yet formally responded to, and known, through the inevitable intelligence penetration of the disclosure process, to Iran itself, which knows that the international community now knows what it has been doing beneath that desert floor for a decade. This creates a specific and urgent strategic problem, because the knowledge changes Iran's calculus in ways that are not uniformly stabilizing. A facility that the international community does not know about can be used at Iran's chosen pace on Iran's chosen timeline with the strategic advantage of initiative. A facility that the international community does know about faces a different future. Iran can deny, as it will certainly do. Iran can refuse IAEA access, as it has done with other sites where it has suspected the agency of having specific intelligence. Iran can move critical equipment and personnel from the facility to other locations, dispersing the capability in ways that make it harder to destroy comprehensively. Or Iran can accelerate, compress the remaining 10 to 15% of weaponization work into the shortest possible timeline, introduce fissile material from the declared enrichment sites in a rapid assembly operation, and present the world with a fait accompli of a completed device before any military option can be executed. Each of these responses creates different problems for the international community and for Israel specifically. The denial and access refusal option extends the status quo, which favors Iran's long-term strategic position. The dispersion option creates a targeting problem that makes military action less effective and requires extended intelligence collection to reconstruct the picture. The acceleration option is the most dangerous and the most likely to produce the military response that Iran has spent 30 years trying to deter. The Israeli intelligence services that found this facility in 72 hours are now tasked with the hardest collection problem in their history, tracking what Iran does with the capability they have found, in real time, quickly enough to inform decisions that may need to be made with much less than 72 hours of notice. This is the race that is running right now, beneath a desert floor, inside a tunnel complex, in the hands of engineers whose names Israeli intelligence knows, whose faces appear in the files of the Atomic Archive, whose methodological fingerprints are on every document in a collection that now tells the world what they have built. They built it in secret. They built it for 10 years. They built it with engineering brilliance and operational security discipline that defeated a decade of international monitoring. And Israel found it in 72 hours. Let me take you back to where we started, that desert floor, those tunnels that were built to be invisible. Those engineers who spent 10 years solving a problem beneath the surface of an agricultural province that no one was supposed to look at. The concealment was extraordinary. It reflected a level of technical sophistication and operational security discipline that the international nonproliferation community had not fully credited Iran with possessing. The depth, the construction methodology, the thermal suppression, the procurement architecture, the personnel compartmentation, every element of it was designed and executed by people who understood exactly what they needed to hide and exactly how to hide it. And yet, the archive that a Mossad team pulled from a warehouse in Tehran's Shorbad district on a single night in 2018 contained the institutional fingerprints of every Iranian nuclear program that had ever run. The human networks that Israeli intelligence has maintained inside Iran's nuclear establishment, at extraordinary cost and risk, provided the pattern recognition that no technical system can replicate. The collection capabilities that Israeli technical intelligence has developed and refined over decades of sustained investment against a single existential priority produced thresholds of detection that Iran's engineers did not know they needed to defeat. The 72 hours was not a miracle. It was the return on 30 years of investment, focused with singular intensity on the single most important intelligence problem in Israel's national security history. What was built in 10 years was found in 72 hours, not because the concealment failed, because the collection was better than the concealment expected it to be. Vladimir Putin built his military to defeat a threat that evolved past it. Iran built its concealment program to defeat a collection capability that evolved past it. The pattern is the same. The lesson is the same. The advantage in the modern intelligence competition goes not to the side that hides things most cleverly, but to the side that finds things most relentlessly. Iran hid a nuclear site for 10 years. Israel found it in 72 hours. And the world that exists after that finding is not the same world that existed before it. The tunnels are known, the engineers are known, the timeline is known. And what happens next? In the policy rooms, in the military planning cells, in the IAEA's technical departments, in the Iranian leadership's deliberations about how to respond to the exposure of a decade of deception, will determine whether the 72 hours that changed everything ultimately change it for better or for worse. But those 72 hours cannot be undone. What was found has been found, and the men who found it have given the world something it did not have before. Time. Contested, uncertain, rapidly closing, but time. What the world does with it is the question that the next chapter will answer. Thank you for watching. If this analysis gave you a clearer picture of what is actually happening beneath the surface of the most consequential arms control story of the 21st century, please like this video and share it. Because understanding what Iran has been building and what Israel found and what the world now has to decide is not a matter for governments and intelligence agencies alone. It is a matter for informed citizens who understand what is at stake. At TGN, we will continue to follow this story with the intensity it demands, because the tunnels are real, the timeline is real, and the decisions being made right now in the intelligence services and the cabinet rooms of half a dozen countries will shape the world your children inherit.